Hello and welcome to Gettable, AFL.com.au's home of trade, draft, free agency and contract news. We are here thanks to Google Pixel. We love our friends at Google Pixel. They've been great supporters of ours right through the year. I'm Riley Beveridge. This is Cal Twomey. Cal, we are back in the studio after a hectic couple of weeks. The trade period is run and done. We're here to wrap it up. Firstly, did you sleep here last night? What was the go?
It's been a big couple of weeks. We did spend a lot of time on air yesterday. Thanks for everyone for tuning in and great job to the team. Nearly 30 players changed clubs across the free agency and trade period. We're going to go through some of the big winners and how it all unfolded as well, because there were plenty of machinations throughout not only the past 24 to 48 hours, but also the lead up to that as well. I want to start with the buzzer beater Bulldogs, because this was a deadline day doggy situation that we knew was going to happen and unfold. They did it again with the four-club deal late in proceedings that sent, of course, Bailey Smith to the Cats and Jack McRae to the Saints. And in for that, they got pick 17 and Matt Kennedy from that deal. Essentially, they weren't ever going to offload their three players without making sure they could at least get one in. So one of those being Matt Kennedy. I think moving out McRae and his money and bringing in Kennedy is a much of a muchness without the same salary. So that's a good result. I think pick 25 for Caleb Daniel as well was probably a bit overs in terms of what North had but was willing to give. So this was some of the discussions that we saw unfold today. But I think that was a win for the Caleb Daniel deal. And in the end, the standoff for Bailey Smith got to those last couple of minutes as we all expected to happen. But they didn't have too much room to move on that one. So pick 17, they get in a good draft. They would have preferred an earlier pick. I think if the Cats had have finished 8th on the ladder and had pick 10 or 12, that would have been handed over. The reality was that the two compensation picks cooked it a little bit and pushed it back 2 more spots from 15 to 17. That makes it look a lot different. But the Dogs were big players late in the period, there's no doubt.
Well, they always are. Their who blinks first strategy that they've had for the last couple of years. What do you make of it? And what do you make of the fact that we're now getting 18 clubs that are basically trying this every year as opposed to just 1 or 2, which it probably used to be?
Well, some play attack and some play defence. And they are a club that I think just waits and waits and waits and sees what happens. They've also been stuck in some scenarios where the other club is in the same boat. So that is part of strategy, but also some situation to that too. They were disappointed, obviously, to miss out on Xavier O'Halloran. Yeah,
they were. They offered, in the end, either pick 35, which they'd gotten as part of those deals, so pick 35 potentially to the Giants for Xavier O'Halloran, or a future second, which they'd tabled right the way through the trade period. Ultimately, the Giants said no to both of those deals.
Would they have done it for 25?
I think they would have, but... and this is sort of the issue with leaving everything so late. Maybe they would have accepted 25 had there been some slides late in the piece and stuff like that. They just didn't have time to do it, ultimately, given those deals were going through at 7:27, 7:28, 2 or 3 minutes before the deadline. So they ran out of time a little bit there. Xavier O'Halloran obviously contracted for next year at the Giants as well. So
you're at the mercy of the clock at that point.
Yeah, you are. So they lost a little bit of time in being able to do that, but ultimately bringing in Matt Kennedy does help with their midfield issues. I mean, they didn't want to lose all 3 of those players, Jack McRae, Caleb Daniel and Bailey Smith, without bringing someone in and leaving themselves short from a midfield perspective.
They can draft well too. If they nail the 2 first picks, those 2 players will be playing in 2025. Let's move on to some of the other big storylines out of the past couple of days, one of them being Jake Stringer. So the Giants had undersold their interest in Jake Stringer for the best part of a month. It was lukewarm, it was on their terms. They'd met him and were keen to get him to the club. And then on Tuesday night, they pulled out. Let's have a listen to Essendon list manager Matt Rosa.
Matt, Jake Stringer, he eventually gets to the Giants. Did you think it was over at one point, though? I mean, it seemed like it was on the rocks a couple of hours ago.
Yeah, we'd been having conversations most of the week, but it got to a point last night where the Giants withdrew their interest, and then it was revived later today. So we just worked through it, and it landed at a point where Jake ends up at GWS.
Yeah, his management revived that one and got it going, of course. And that's the swings and roundabouts and fluctuations of the trade period and the live happenings of this as it goes. They managed to bargain it down from pick 56 to 53, so a couple of spots. In the end, that pushes him a couple of spots earlier. And you never know who that player is. If it's going to get there and then that deal's happen, clearly the Bombers are open to him moving and open to him exploring that. And he, in the end, had moved on from the Bombers. I think the Bombers had moved on from Stringer as well. He kicked 42 goals last year. The Bombers have his role pigeonholed for Archie Perkins. So Perkins has played in the midfield. He's done some forward line stuff as well. I think he's been seeing himself as one of those striker players, the guy who can go in the midfield, kick some goals, and also plays that half-forward role. Now he gets a real opportunity to make it his own, and I think that's important for this whole discussion around what the Bombers will be doing next year and how they look. Do you think he fits for the Giants, though?
I think he fits given their forward mix. They've got the smalls, obviously. We know about Brent Daniels and Darcy Jones and Toby Bedford have been great there. They needed another mid-sized guy with Aaron Cadman and Jesse Hogan, though, I think. So he fits into that forward line. I think there's a real watch on the Giants now in what they do from a delisted free agency perspective as well going forward. They lost so many players. We know about, obviously, Peatling and Cumming and Perryman, who moved across the trade period. Dirksen and O'Halloran had interest, but they get kept. We've wrote before that they've met with Ben Patton as a potential delisted free agency option. They've also got some interest in Jack Carroll from Carlton as a delisted free agency option. He's still uncontracted. The Blues hasn't been offered a deal for 2025. We know they had some interest as well in Dylan Shield. That didn't get done. So I wonder if they're looking now at Jack Carroll to potentially fill a midfield role for them going forward. I'd also expect that they'd have to start talks now with Xavier O'Halloran in the next couple of months, I'd think, over the off-season, given he was offered a longer-term contract at the Western Bulldogs and they held him to that contract. They have to offer him a longer-term deal now to say, hey, we still want you at the club. This is what we're going to put forward for you going forward.
What did you think of the Kangaroos' end to the trade period? Because they were in the thick of the action. They hadn't wanted to budge on their offer for Luke Parker. The Swans had wanted much more than pick 62. And that obviously ended up seeing Parker and Jacob Constanti join the footy club. Constanti being thrown in as part of that deal. Yeah,
I liked it. And I liked the fact that they were able to get Constanti as a part of it because of the point being that Jacob Constanti, as we'd written, had interest as a delisted free agency option. So Essendon was among the clubs that were keen. St Kilda had met with him, but their interest was probably lukewarm and they probably weren't going to persist with that. But including Jacob Constanti in that deal just gave the North Melbourne Football Club a step up and a first option to take him. So they get that deal done, paid a bit more than they were willing to earlier through the trade period. They had 62 on the table, but they get him in. Probably paid a bit more for Caleb Daniel as well. They were willing to. They wanted something back initially, pick 48 to get Caleb Daniel and pick 25 going to the Western Bulldogs, but they get that deal done there. You can see Marty Pass, Caleb Daniel's manager, helping to organise that at the end. Look, you might say they overpaid for Daniel. You might say they overpaid from what their starting point was on Luke Parker. My view on this, and you know my view on this throughout the whole way through, is that you have to overpay to bring guys in that you want to bring into the football club, particularly when they're contracted. Caleb Daniel and Luke Parker were both contracted. So
yeah, and they went from experience. Now, they went and tried to get a lot of different players who maybe were in latter stages of their careers, but not quite to the point of Parker and Darling.
Yeah.
And they didn't want to move. So you have to go for different types of players and options that are going to fit for the short term. And that's clearly something that they've addressed. I think in getting Caleb Daniel, they'll also look to get some extra movement for Colby McKercher as a halfback option next year. Yeah,
they certainly will. What about Gold Coast, Cal? Because clearly they deal in a different currency to everyone else. We know that. I think you put it well yesterday when you said they deal in crypto, everyone else deals in cash. Talk to us about their ins and outs, because they managed to bring in some back-end picks through the trade period, which would have clearly been a goal of theirs to match an early bid on Leo Lombard. They get 2 first-round picks in next year, so they're going to be a threat there. And then Dan Rioli is a fantastic pickup for them, isn't he?
Yeah, Suncoin, I'm calling it. They had the most sought-after chip of the trade period in pick 13, and clubs were coming for that from everywhere. For the second year in a row, I mean, last year they had pick 4, everyone came for that, the Bulldogs ended up getting that. And it's to get out of the bid for Leo Lombard and tally up the picks later. So some would say, yeah, they offered pick 6 and 23 for Daniel Rioli. They had to get that trade done. He was contracted for another 3 years.
Yeah.
He's best and fairest winner, and they made the promise to get it done. 5-year deal for him there. He and John Noble bring some much-needed speed and pizzazz to the half-back line, which is clearly an area for them. Elliot Himmelberg has some key defensive depth. But the thing I like about their hand, and they've done this again, because Rioli only injects some more experience and quality to their group, and you can see him playing in the Hardwick mould again as he tried to remould Gold Coast under his own image. But from a Suns point of view, I look ahead to next year again and think, okay, they've just been a juggernaut over the last 2 trade periods. What's stopping them doing that again? They've got 3 first-round picks for next year. 3 already.
They're going to have the most sought-after pick again next year,
well,
aren't they?
They will. The system's a little bit different in that the DVI and bidding system will change, but in having 3 first-round picks, 1 tied to Collingwood, 1 tied to Port Adelaide and their own, they can only match the bid for Zeke Uland, Zeke the Freak, who's in their academy. Bo Adensel was really good on grand final day as well. So they'll have multiple academy players too. And Yeah, I think they're in a really strong position. It has to be finals next year.
Yeah, I think so as well. And getting someone like Dan Rioli, who knows the Damien Hardwick system back to front, is a massive win for them. He'll be another coach for them out on the field in 2025. You'd have to think. Also, the points that they managed to get back in, I think it equates to just over 1,000, which measures up to around pick 16, which gives them up to pick 16 to play with for Leo Lombard. But of course, they can navigate that further on the night by moving picks out, moving picks in, depending on what happens. So they'll be well covered to match that bid for Leo Lombard. Richmond, their draft hand is out of this world after this trade period, isn't it?
Let's have a look at it because it is pretty crazy. And look, they've lost some quality players. They've probably lost their 3 best players to make this happen. Daniel Rioli, Shea Bolton and Liam Baker, and Jack Graham goes as a free agent as well.
Yep.
It leaves them, though, with an all-time draft hand. Pick 1, 6, 10, 11, 18, 20, 23 and 24. They're averaging 1 every 3 picks in the first 24 selections. So they are going to dominate the next little period. And it was a time where things lined up for the Tigers, really, because the clubs who were chasing their key players in Rioli and Bolton had picks and were willing to use them. They struck when the buyers had collateral. And Fremantle's offer and deal to get Shea Bolton was a pretty fair deal in the end. They used their 3 first-round picks, 10, 11, 18. They got Bolton and pick 14 back and also a future third-rounder. So essentially it was 2 first-round picks to get it done while still remaining in the first round with pick 14. So the Tigers were able to look up and now say, well, how do we move these around? How do we play with these picks? But ultimately, they are in the best position they can be to rebuild whilst they've only won a premiership 4 years ago. So, and to have
who do they get?
Okay, well, I think number 1 is still a line ball call, and there's still some options in there. Sam Lawler has been spoken about a lot in that discussion. He is a medium forward / midfielder. Injury hit this year, but we know what he can do as an impact player. He can mark above his head. He's powerful. He's got an explosive streak, and I think he's a future captain as well. We had him on this desk not too long ago, and he spoke really well. He's got untapped potential, I think. So he's one to look at. Finn O'Sullivan as well played for their VFL side. Here he is with his mark as a bottom major, playing for Vic Country, where he was an All-Australian last year. Had an injury interrupted this season this year, but that won't stop him from being right amongst the top contenders. He's his goal playing for the Tigers VFL side later in the season. Yeah, a powerful runner, a good ball user and an impact midfielder as well. He doesn't care about the extra stats. He's about making impact. And as is Harvey Langford. But Langford had a super season all the way through. I think he'd have to be right in contention for one of these top 3 or 4 selections. I was there that day. That was a great goal. He plucked that out of nowhere. And that wasn't a fluke either. He's a great overhead mark, 190 centimetres, and has a huge presence to him as a midfielder. So all those guys, I think, would have to be right in contention. Of course, Jagger Smith as well, probably on the verge of that too.
Let's not forget about one of the biggest deals that went down. It wasn't a deadline day deal, but it involved 3 clubs, 5 players. The biggest name in this year's trade period in Dan Houston as well. Talk us through this one, because Dan Houston's been a name that you put on the radar probably in July. He eventually gets to Collingwood, having had interest from 4 or 5 clubs in Victoria throughout that period where he was exploring his options to go back to Victoria. They get Jack Lukosius, Joe Richards and Rory Atkins do. Port Adelaide, having lost Dan Houston, picks 13 and 29 come through the door. Collingwood get Dan Houston, Gold Coast get John Noble as part of this, and also wrap up those 2 future first-round picks. But Dan Houston and the way this played out, because it was on Monday afternoon, it was off on Monday night, it was back on Tuesday. How did this play out?
Well, there's been 15 steps for Dan Houston to get from Port Adelaide to land at Collingwood, and I won't go through all of them now. You can check out some of our work on Trade Radio if you want to go through all of them. But it's been a long haul, and it came down to the point where this was a no-win situation for Port Adelaide, really. Dan Houston did not want to return back to the Power. He had been adamant on that. So they searched for the best deal out there, and unlike Richmond, who did have takers with picks, none of the Victorian clubs who were in the market for him had the picks or collateral to do things. So St Kilda had a pick or 2, well, they had 2, but then pulled out and didn't want to use one. They went to focus on the draft. Essendon didn't want to use pick 9. They had their draft focus as well. Geelong's pick was tied up in Bailey Smith. Houston turned his back on Melbourne. Just remember that as well as part of the whole decision-making process. Richmond was busy in the draft and trade space. They weren't bringing someone like him in. The Bulldogs were interested but didn't have their draft hand until 7:28 last night. Hawthorn's pick was tied up in Tom Barras. So it left Collingwood, Carlton and North Melbourne to get to these final reaches of it. Carlton was keen and had interest. He was keen on Carlton, but they didn't want to use their first pick. And when it got down to the point where they had 12 and 14, they wanted to move up the draft board rather than use one of them on Dan Houston, and even that might not have got it done regardless. Collingwood had to get 13 to make it happen, which is why they paid overs probably to get that one in as part of their future first round pick, and Noble as part of the triple deal there. And North Melbourne's best offer, should they have landed pick 13, was going to be pick 13 and 44.
Yep.
So what Port Adelaide's ended up with now is better than pick 13 and 44. But Houston wanted out, so it was a pretty difficult one to navigate, but he was dead set on not going back to Port Adelaide.
It was an extraordinary situation, that one.
But I mean, it's 5 months worth of a story. There's no doubt about that. And there's no doubt that across this trade period, I think it's a very unique and extraordinary trade story that I don't know if we'll see too many cases like it again, because the twists and turns and the chase for a dual All-Australian. Let's not forget, this guy is the best player in the trade period for me. And it still came down to the last couple of days where we actually knew where he might want to go. He didn't officially nominate. It wasn't going to be like that. So, yeah, very unique case.
We haven't seen a situation where there's 48 hours to go in the trade period. We don't know where the best player who's moving clubs in that trade period is going to go.
It's just not the way it happens these days. I mean, they nominate generally. But in fairness, he did leave his options open to get him back to Victoria. And worst case for him would have been to get to North Melbourne, because that was down the priority list of his groupings. And he had some sort of links to Collingwood. Nick Dacos was huge in the prize chase to get him. He was all in on getting Houston to the footy club, and that shows where Collingwood's at the moment as well. Speaking of that, I want to bring something back. A segment that we haven't had for a little bit of a time. It's time for the Kaleidoscope. Where are we? Here we are. This is where Kaleidoscope, we see things a little bit differently. We're seeing things through a different view, like the Kaleidoscope.
So what do you got for us today?
All right, this is my 5 lessons of the trade period. Number 1, you get your kicks with picks. So this is the new part of the trade period that you have to be right across. This is why you watch Gettable all year, because draft and trade go hand in hand, and clubs know that, and we saw that in the first week. You know, you're talking about there's only 2 players who've been traded for the first 8 days. That's because everyone was focused on the draft. There was pick 13, then it was pick 9, then it was pick 11, and there'll be more to come on that space as well. The chase of picks this year was unprecedented and pretty extraordinary. It's a bit of a flaw of the bidding system that threat bids can come in and push these clubs to be cornered and move out. But the likes of Essendon and Gold Coast did it successfully, and were able to get their draft hand. So Melbourne ended up with pick 5 and 9, which is huge for them. We talk about the clubs that play defence or play attack. They attack the Ds on the draft front. They go really hard. The Bombers got a huge haul of selections this year, and the guaranteed move of 3 guns over the course of 2 years. We can absolutely lock in, we'll be going wacko for Kako on draft night and in the future. Lesson number 2, everybody wants to be Geelong, and for good reason. This is a club that is contending every year. Geelong will continue to be Geelong, and Bailey Smith will help that. That gets a team with a 23-year-old gun midfielder who has been out of sight, out of mind, but still a very good player. But the Cats have become the norm for the top clubs and the model. Like Collingwood now is going all in the space where they don't want to fall down. We heard Justin Leppich speak about this throughout the trade period. They're absolutely in it for the now. They paid Perryman to get him to the other side, and they went all in on Houston, trading out that future first pick. But while you've got Nick and Josh Dacos, and you just come off a premiership a couple of years ago, they are all in on it.
Strike while the iron's hot.
It is the 3rd time in 5 years they've traded out their future first round pick, though. So they're playing on the edge, but it's got them a pick. Number 3, relations are key. We saw the power of allies in the trade period, and that comes from club to club, management group working with clubs, being central to these decisions in the mega trade last night, but also in the real mega trade of the Houston and Lukosius deal as well. From a club point of view, I look at the allies as well and think that things can happen. So Adelaide and Melbourne lodged the Alex Neil-Bullen deal early, and then it was in the first hour of the trade period, and it allowed both to go and do some work after that. It gave the Demons pick 28, which they handed to the Bombers, and they threw around to every other club. So that allowed them to get moving on the pick front. And the Crows had a really good period, I thought, with Neil-Bullen coming in as a free agent, and James Peatling.
They also did another pick swap later in the period, which helped unlock some things for both sides as well.
Hawthorn have rejoined the Destination Club. They are one of the clubs who are now DCC. Yeah, that's right. Josh Battle had many suitors, but chose to have the Hawks on a 6-year deal. Tom Barras and the Dogs had the Dogs and the Pies looking at him through the year, but landed on the Hawks with Sam Mitchell. So they went a bit hawk ball to hawk trade with that pick move out from 14 to the future, and ended up paying a pretty sizable amount in the end. But contract a player. And they are now a destination club once more. And the last lesson for me is that superstars will move clubs next year, because the AFL got it wrong in not allowing clubs to be able to trade 2 years in advance in terms of picks. It would have opened up a few more deals, I reckon. But that will be the case next year where you can trade 2 years in advance. So clubs are going to be ultra aggressive. If Chad Warner's on the market, West Coast already has 4 first-rounders for next year to play with. If Cozzy Pickett follows through on moving interstate, which he's thought about and had interest in, well, Freo already has 3 picks for next year. And if Harley Reid is tempted back to Victoria after 2 years, Essendon has 4 picks. So 14 out of 21 players this year who moved clubs who were traded were contracted. That's 2/3, if I'm doing my numbers well. That's correct. That's a crazy percentage.
It is.
So I think there'll be more of it, though, with more picks at clubs' disposals.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see how that future trading plays out over.
Have you got a lesson out of the trade period, given so much was going on?
Well, just what you said there with kicks, get your kicks with picks, and you said that clubs can often take advantage of knowing that academy players going to be bid on. Are you saying that clubs that don't have academy players can benefit from the academy system as well? Who would have thought? Who would have thought that other clubs can benefit from the academy system? Riley Sanders is at the Western Bulldogs because they benefited from Gold Coast needing to ship out pick 4 last year. Whoever Melbourne takes at pick 9 is going to be at Melbourne because of the fact that a bid for Isaac Kako is coming in. Clubs benefit from the academy system in different ways, and clubs can use it. So it doesn't just benefit the northern clubs that have these academies coming through, or the clubs in Victoria that have these NGA academies coming through. It can benefit everyone. Clubs can find ways that they can benefit it.
Get your kicks with pick 66.
Get your kicks with pick 66. All right, we're going to have a look at the draft. Before we get to the draft, though, just want to say a quick thing. One man who's helped us out with the draft so much across the last couple of years is a guy that you probably don't know his name. His name's Jordan Carnell. He's left the AFL to explore opportunities elsewhere, but he's been such a help to us. He's found
joined a rival. He's jumped ship.
He certainly has. But we love JC. He's helped us with all of our draft vision. He's helped us with all of our social Instagram posts over the last couple of years. So we just wanted a quick shout out to JC before we get to the draft order. We've loved your work, JC, and good luck for what's still to come for your career. But the draft order looks completely different. And if we look at the top 20 now, 13 of these top 20 picks didn't exist with the clubs that they're currently with before the trade and draft period. So 13 picks have already swapped hands. I'm sure we'll see more heading into draft night though, Kel.
Yeah, I think this is where the fun actually begins. Trying to see who wants to push up the order. St Kilda will be a target for clubs trying to shift back, but also clubs trying to push up at 7 and 8. So I think the Giants would look with 15 and 16 if they can get up, if the player's available. They've shown previously that they do that. North Melbourne still will be open to a slight shift. Can they move back 2 or 3 spots and pick up a selection? Melbourne are always proactive. I think 5 and 9 are pretty good spots to hold though. And Richmond, well, clubs are already trying to reach in and grab a first round pick from the Tigers, thinking that they might want to spread these picks out over a couple of years. So that would take a club offering up a future first-round pick, maybe even a little bit more come draft night. But that's where it stands now. I dare say that by the time we reach draft night, that'll change as well. Of course, picks can be swapped until November 8, and that's no doubt about the fact that we're going to see a lot more movement on that front too.
Do you ever watch on any clubs potentially moving around with their picks going into it? I mean, I think Essendon's clearly one that's, when a bid for Isaac Kako's placed, they're going to potentially try and move back into the draft order to get another first round pick in. But do you have any, like a St Kilda watch to potentially move up at 7 and 8, a Sydney watch with 19 and 22?
Yeah, Sydney might be. And also, I think, as you say about Kako, it might be the same with West Coast too. Once they use their first pick, they could throw one of their 2 future first round picks in and say, hey, can we get back in and grab another first round pick for this year? Look, it's going to be tough to do that. You're going to have to take a seller, but that might be the case. Just on a more sombre note, Riley, obviously some really sad news for the AFL industry yesterday with the passing of Chris Toshay, a member of the recruiting fraternity, the recruiting boss off Richmond. Just wanted to pass on our sincere condolences to his family and everyone who knew Chris and were friends with Chris, and the Richmond family as well. Some terrible news. He battled illness over this year. It was only a matter of weeks ago that he was actually working. We saw him in some games, and he loved his craft and was so dedicated to it. So a big commiserations and condolences to everyone who knew Chris. A great guy. We got to know him on our trips interstate and as part of our recruiting work as well in terms of following the draft progress. He was obviously at the Saints before joining the Tigers. Some of his proudest picks, I think, included Nazai Wanganeen-Malera. He was the SA-based scout for the Saints in 2018, I think it was, and they drafted Callum Wilkie, who he's a big product of and huge fan of as well. Cooper Sharman as a mid-season pick. So some really sad news and from us to the family of Chris, we wish you all the best in the coming months.
No, completely well said, Cal. Our thoughts with Richmond, obviously, and everyone in the AFL recruiting world that knew and loved Chris. Thanks for joining us today. We'll see you next week on Gettable.
For all things W, we've got you covered. A cast of the game's biggest stars and experts discuss the top stories and headlines, plus in-depth analysis across the AFLW season. Join us each week for The W Show thanks to NAB on afl.com.au and the AFL Live app.